Hope you've got a deep seat in the saddle and you've got your pen ready, because I've got a lot of stuff to talk with you about. I truly believe that the greatest apologetic issue of our day is whether we can trust the Bible in our hands. Because we live in a day where there is the internet, where there is cable television, there is the availability of the enemies of the faith to spread a tremendous amount of misinformation about our beliefs. As a result of that, we are faced with attacks upon the reliability of the text of Scripture each and every day. Our young people, when we send them off to college and university, will be encountering individuals who will simply mock them for believing that what we possess today as the New Testament is in any way, shape, or form relevant to what was actually written long, long ago. And we need to be discussing these things in the context of the church. This is where we need to be discussing it, not trying to do damage control once our young people come home and they no longer believe what they were taught as they were growing up. So we need to recognize that naturalistic materialism rules the day in the academy, in academia. That is, if you can't weigh it, you can't put it on a graph, you can't see it in a microscope, then it doesn't exist. Everything that exists we can eventually figure out. Humanism, the focus upon man's ability, man's knowledge, this rules the day in the higher education in Western worlds. Anything, Western cultures, anything that does not presuppose an uncreated universe that can be explained solely on the basis of naturalism is rejected a priori. You believe in miracles, you believe there's a God, you believe there's a creator. How can you be so foolish? How can you be so backwards? Is what we are being told all the time. Therefore, Christian claims are relegated to the area of merely being myth. And in much of Western society, especially in Europe, anyone who believes that a religious text actually speaks the truth is now directly under attack. Our freedoms to even speak these things in public are under attack in Western culture, and I believe those attacks are moving our direction. The media is filled with those who would mock our faith and would say that we have been deceived. In January of this year, I'll be debating one of the best known of these individuals, a former Christian by his own profession, a graduate of Moody Bible Institute, Wheaton College, and Princeton Seminary by the name of Dr. Bart Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman has written a number of books, one of which was called Misquoting Jesus. It became a New York Times bestseller. Here is an example of the kind of presentation that is being made in our society, in our culture today, by people like Dr. Ehrman.
My guest tonight is a religious scholar and chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina. His best-selling book is Misquoting Jesus, the story behind who changed the Bible and why. Please welcome Bart Ehrman. Who were someone that went through sort of a period of discovery? You were a literalist, I guess, or born again, you would say. And then as you studied and learned more about it, you began to question it.
Right. I started out being interested in the Bible because I was a born-again Christian, a fundamentalist who thought that the very words of the Bible had been given by God. And so I studied Greek in college and decided to read the New Testament in Greek.
Because that was the original language.
The original language was written. And so the more I studied, though, the more I saw there's an enormous problem. We don't have the original Greek copies of any of these books. All we have are these thousands of manuscripts from centuries later that have all these changes in it. And so this, realizing that we didn't have the original and that some places we don't know what the original said, that had quite a profound effect on my faith that these words had been given by God.
Now, that kind of presentation from a man who is considered to be one of the leading scholars in textual matters regarding the New Testament has caused many people to lose their faith in the reliability of the New Testament text itself. And yet, you're listening to a man who has left the Christian faith, and people look at that and go, well, there must be a reason for that. Most of the time that I meet people who've left the Christian faith, and I start doing a little bit of digging, the reasons were not exactly what they say they were. But the fact of the matter is, scholars spin the evidence, particularly in media appearances. Dr. Ehrman has been all over NPR, National Public Radio. If he sneezes, they want to do an interview on it. It's just incredible. But of course, they don't want to have anyone who would respond to what he has to say. Those folks aren't going to show up on The Daily Show or with Bill Maher or any of these other folks, because our society wants to disbelieve. They want reasons to disbelieve, and these individuals are providing that. They, as you heard from Dr. Ehrman, emphasize that all we have are copies of copies of copies from hundreds of years after the originals. I have listened to Dr. Ehrman very often in many of his presentations, and over again. All we have is a copy of a copy of a copy from hundreds of years later. There is simply no way that we can know what the originals actually said. And in fact, he put out a book back in the mid-90s. This is his sort of scholarly work on this subject. Misquoting Jesus was more of the popularized version, called The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, the Effect of Early Christological Controversies on the Text of the New Testament. Now that had impact in the academy, didn't have a whole lot of impact out in the church because it's written on too technical a level for most people really to follow what it's saying. But that is the kind of material that is being presented with regularity today. So, before I put a number up on the screen, let me just ask you, the audience, how many variants? A variant is a place where the handwritten manuscripts disagree from one another. Where one handwritten manuscript might say Monday, and one handwritten manuscript might say Wednesday, or something like that, where there's a difference in the spelling of someone's name, or whether the word "and" is there. All of those are called textual variants. In fact, if I asked you all today to take out your bulletins and to write on a separate sheet of paper everything you found in the bulletin, and then we were to collect them and look at them, guess what? Most of you would make mistakes. Most of you would spell things wrong or skip a line or do something like that. That is the nature of handwritten transmission of documents. So how many variants do you think there might be in the New Testament manuscripts? How many variants do you think, just off the top of your head, might there be when we look at all the New Testament manuscripts we possess today? How many variants do you think there might be? Well, it depends on the person you're talking to. Most of us have never even given it a second thought. Do you think 100? 1,000? Well, if you take all of them together, there are approximately 400,000 variants. Bart Ehrman likes to stop, just like I just did, to make sure you hear the number. And start thinking about that. 400,000! I thought we were talking about the reliability of the New Testament. I had no idea. 400,000! And they just love to hammer that number home. And they sort of want to leave it there. Especially when you think about some other things. There are only about 138,162 words in the New Testament. So if you have 400,000 variants, that's about 3 variants per word. Now, I have heard people from all sorts of backgrounds. Atheists. I've heard Muslims. Muslims love to use atheist arguments because they believe the New Testament's been corrupted. I've seen people for all sorts of different reasons take this information and just run with that right there. Just stop right there and say, how can you trust anything? There could be 3 different readings for every single word in the New Testament. Obviously, that means it's been completely corrupted. It can't be trusted. Therefore, and the atheist then says, therefore, you shouldn't be believing what it has to say about a God or anything like that. The Muslim says, therefore, you need the Quran, which has been perfectly preserved, which actually hasn't been, but that's a whole other issue. And the whole idea is stop trusting that and start trusting what I want you to believe. And even the atheist, he has his own worldview, even if he doesn't want to defend it. He has his own worldview. He has his own reasons for trying to get you to believe what he wants you to believe. I mentioned that in the local community colleges, you'll have these philosophy of religion professors. My daughter will be 20 in January. Last year, as a freshman student, she encountered a vitriolic, virulent anti-Christian. Being that my daughter is very much like me, which is a very scary thing, me in a female body, that's a scary thing. She eventually got tired of it and took him on in the middle of the class, and he melted down because he's not accustomed to freshman college students pointing out that he isn't properly distinguishing between Greek and Hebrew. Anyway, And if you're interested in the results of all that, I put that all on my blog at aomin.org. You can see the open letters to him and so on and so forth. It's quite the interesting experience. But these people, what they want to do is they want to take this, just take this kind of information, and they want to confidently tell everyone, no one can really have any confidence that the text they read today accurately reflects what was originally written. That's the message they want to get across. They all have different purposes, but that's the message, that's the drumbeat that you're going to hear over and over again in our society. So how do we respond to it? What's the answer to these things? Well, it takes some time and some thought to understand the nature of these objections and the nature of the facts. Let's look at what they don't tell you. First of all, 99% of all variants do not impact the meaning of the text. Variations in spelling, word order, make up the vast bulk of variations. And in his scholarly writings, Dr. Ehrman admits all of that. In his scholarly writings, where he's writing to other people who know textual criticism, he admits that. He admits that 99% of all the variants in the New Testament are absolutely, positively meaningless to the proper translation of the text. Part of this is due to the fact of the original languages. In the New Testament, the Greek language, for example, word order is very different than it is in English. And as anyone who knows the Greek language knows, there's all sorts of different ways you can say the same thing. You can put words in all sorts of different orders, and they all come across into English in the exact same way. So issues of word order and how whether you spell John with one N or two N's or so on and so forth are not relevant to the accurate transmission of the text over time. So, if 99% of them, scholars agree, do not impact the actual transmission of the text over time, we don't have any question about what the original actually said, then 1% of 400,000 equals 4,000 meaningful textual variants out of 138,162 words is approximately 2.9%, or one meaningful variant every 3 pages in the text of the New Testament. Now, I don't know that we would do that well in this room. If I handed out a 10-page typewritten document, and before you left, we put big, ugly guys at the back of the room, you can't get out until you've copied it all by hand. I'll bet you anything we wouldn't get anywhere close to this as far as accuracy of transmission, and we're sitting in an air-conditioned room with lights, and some of us have LASIK and everything else, and that's not anything that anybody had back then. I don't think we would get very close to that kind of a presentation. That, of course, is quite a different picture than what these individuals would like to present to our students or to us in that particular context. Now, simple fact, the more manuscripts you have for a particular work of antiquity, the more textual variants you'll have. Let's face it, if we only had one manuscript of the New Testament, guess how many variants we'd have? None. 0. But if we only had one, how much confidence would we actually have that this was originally written? Almost 0. So when people throw out those big numbers, all they're reflecting is the fact is that we have a lot of New Testament manuscripts. There are more than 5,500 cataloged manuscripts of the New Testament books. Now, not all of those are from Matthew to Revelation. In fact, most of them are not. Especially the older ones will be of a particular book, a portion of a book, something along those lines. But still, the average length of those manuscripts, of those 5,500 plus, is 200 pages. And do the math for yourself, that is approximately 1.2 million pages of text grand total. 1.2 million pages of text. 4,000 variants. You starting to get the idea now? How people can, you know the statistics. Anybody can use statistics. Anybody can use numbers. Not that any politicians would ever do that, but it is a political season. And so maybe you've encountered people who use numbers in a somewhat less than a proper way. Well, that's why we need to know what's really going on in these kinds of situations. So think about it. 4,000 meaningful variants over 1.2 million pages of hand-copied text spanning approximately 1,500 years prior to the invention of printing.